This is something I've been working on for a while. I'm always confused why people fall for the socialism trick. So I want to try to explain it here today. What is the trick people are playing to get other people to buy into socialism? How are so many people convinced by socialist and communist arguments? What is the trick? Why do we see these memes everywhere, deriding people that fall for this sort of thing, where they say, oh, socialism works, how many hundreds of millions are dead, right? And the thing is, I think I can explain it now. I've been working on this literally for decades, trying to explain this to people. It's very hard to explain to people. I think, but I'm going to give it a go, and let me know how well I do. Like, we have comments and stuff for a reason. The basic trick is a single perspective trick, right? So you're using a perspective of yourself, the person that you're targeting, right, to get them into their ego, right? And once they're in their ego, you do all kinds of things with them. And the person that's telling you about the wonders of socialism, or whatever pitch they're using, they are the narrator. And now, the thing is, they narrate a solution to whatever problem it is. The problem could be inequality, like a generic, just people are unequal, right? It could be wealth disparity. Some people are poor, or some people are middle class, and some people are wealthy. And why is that, right? It could be working class, having to work more, because it looks like this is true, than the people with money. I don't know that that's true. It doesn't look that way to me. But if you think that's a problem, that's a problem you perceive in the world, that's the narrator using that, right? So they tell you a story. That's why the narrator tells you a story. This is why I think people are confused about story, narrative, and archetype, which of course I have a video on. Please check that video out. People get confused by this. Some narrator is telling you a story that seems to relate to a problem that you have seen through your perspective, right? Single perspective framing, personal, right? Single perspective, personal framing. You've noticed, right, that people work extra hours and the managers go home because they only work 9 to 5 or, 9 to 3 or whatever it is, right? And people have noticed that. Like, I have noticed that. That is a frame that I have been in as a person. It's a perspective that I have held, right? But that enables multiple tricks to be played on you once you're stuck in your personal frame, right? So they the narrator sticks you inside the personal frame, right? They take no responsibility for the narration, by the way. And this is something that I learned from my good buddy Jesse in Australia. Thank you, Jesse. Finally figured this out. He's been trying to show me this for probably a year and a half, and I just haven't seen it, I'm sure. But that's why we do these things. That's why this YouTube channel is here. And so the narrator doesn't really tell you anything other than there's a state where no one is in charge of something common. Now, the thing about this idea is that you can have, we'll say, something in common with a bunch of people, hopefully, but no one needs to be in charge of it. No one needs to manage it. No one needs to have authority over it or take leadership of it. That's impossible, and it's a lie, right? Personal things require personal management. Have you ever heard of private property? Private property is your right to personally manage things that you personally put effort into and get that personal benefit out to do with what you will. And this is a nice Republican or conservative position, right? If you don't do that well, the thing that you have as personal property will be worth less to others than people who do it well, right? People with a well-kept yard, their houses sell for more. Like, literally, just mowing your yard will make your house value go up. And you could say, it's not by a lot. Well, all those little things, like having the exterior cleaned, having new paint, cleaning up the rest of the yard, not just mowing it, but also making it look nice and maybe having some bushes in front that are well trimmed. All those things add up to tens of thousands of dollars. Ask any real estate agent. They will tell you this. They'll talk to you for free, by the way. You can do research there if you want, right? And so Common things require common management. Personal management and common management are not the same because they don't have the same purpose, right? Like I can make all the decisions about how I want to manage my house. If I live here alone, I can just decide. I want a clean yard. I don't care about a clean yard. I want flowers. I don't want flowers. Flowers are a lot of work. I can decide how things look. I can decide whether or not, irrespective of how they look, how they operate, right? I can say, oh, I want, brand new kitchen appliances, or I want brand new fittings in the bathroom and the kitchens and things like that. With a common system, you can't necessarily do that because not everybody adheres to the same standard. So the way you manage a system with more than one person in it varies. Here's part of the trick, right? They tell you there is no need for a manager. And you want to cooperate with the narrator. Like they're telling you something important. They've pointed out a problem that you've seen personally from your perspective. It looks like a problem to me, right? And you want to cooperate with them because you believe this problem that you've seen can be solved. And because you care about the problem or about the people that are being affected by the problem. Fair enough. You have empathy. Well, fair. I despise empathy. Different issue. Right? I think it's a trick. But the presumption was that there is a problem. This condition in the world has been presented to you as a problem. And by definition, problems have solutions. So here's somebody presenting you a problem that you have seen personally, from your personal perspective, with your own eyes, experienced in your own life, experienced other people having effects from, seemingly, the effects from that problem. Maybe they didn't. Maybe it just seems that way, by the way, because maybe you weren't there. And so you want to solve it. Right? Fair. But what if it's not a problem and therefore doesn't have a solution? Because problems by definition have solutions, but not all things are problems. Some things are just the way of the world. Gravity doesn't have a solution. There's no solution to gravity. It's going to be there. It's going to follow the rules of gravity, and maybe there are exceptions to rules of gravity, or maybe we can overcome the rules of gravity in certain specific circumstances. Fair. That's true for all rules, by the way. Not very exciting. But the gravity doesn't go away. You just don't will the gravity away. You don't come up with a bunch of things or come up with something with a bunch of people that negates gravity. And maybe we will someday, right? But gravity is really not a problem. It's more of a condition of the world. You're not going to solve it. So here's somebody trying to help you to solve it, right? Maybe they're giving you a new way to think about it, right? Oh, well, if the wealth were just more evenly distributed, then these people that seem to have a money problem, which I'm suspicious doesn't exist, at least in the way they cast it, wouldn't have that problem, right? They'd have enough money all of a sudden. And usually their math is wrong, by the way. It's always good to check people's math. People often get basic math wrong, often, especially when they're ideologues and they're pursuing, their goals. And the thing is, it's not just you. The narrator's along this journey with you, right? The narrator isn't you. But see, you're already in the trick. The swindle has already begun with the framing from the narrator. Right? It's already happened. So you're already deep in the trick by this point. You've already agreed of the problem, and you want to solve it, and there are solutions available, right? And the narrator isn't you, so you're not the only one. You're not alone seeing this. The narrator sees this too, right? They're pointing to people that you've seen impacted by this problem, right? On both sides. Maybe they're benefiting, or maybe they're being held down because of this problem, right? And here comes socialism to fix the problem, to solve the problem, to resolve it, right? And since set and setting matter, right? So this all is important, right? Somebody's got to set the scene. Somebody's got to give you a way to relate, a frame, right? And the narrator already has your unconscious buy-in because you know it's a problem, you want to fix it, right? Or maybe you didn't see it as a problem, but they're telling you it's a problem, and now you're like, oh, it's a problem. Let's get together and fix it. You get the unconscious buy-in, right? They give you a scenario where no management is needed. You don't need to manage common property. Why would you need to do that? How do they convince you that this is true? They convince you that this is true by appealing to your personal, private, individual perspective. That's what they do. You have a personal perspective. We all do. We have to. That's what makes us persons, personal, right? Perspective. And they appeal to that. You've seen the results of this. Well, you saw the results of something. It might not have been the results of like consumerism or the results of capitalism or the results of inequality. It might not have been, right? I mean, sometimes you don't know. You suspect. It looks that way. A lot of things look a lot of different ways, by the way. And usually it's some pattern like this, right? If you had goats and someone else had cows and there was a common area, right? Like the Boston Common. This is what the Boston Common was for, by the way. You could figure out a way between the two of you, right, to manage where the goats were grazing and where the cows were grazing. And two of you could cooperate to come up with a solution to that problem, which means there's no reason for an external third party to manage that property. That's what, if that were true, that might, but actually doesn't mean that, right? I'll tell you why it doesn't in a minute. So that's the usual sort of a pattern, right? They don't overgraze the land because we just watch them, okay? Now, and of course, you would try that. You would absolutely try to work with the other person to do that. And that works with your personal property. It does. It just doesn't work outside of your personal property. It's a little thing the narrator didn't tell you, right? Among many, many things. But you would try that. I agree that you would try that. I would definitely try that, right? It's the first thing I do, go to my neighbor. And people talk about this all the time. Well, did you go to the neighbor and talk to them first before going to the police? Well, that's weird. We know we do this. And we know that it works sometimes. It doesn't work all the time, though. Sometimes you have to go to the police. That's why they ask you, did you try to resolve this privately first? Personally first? That's a hint, by the way. Police. Then you go to them when the private or personal negotiation fails or doesn't have the result or doesn't have a good result, we'll say, right? So the problem is, would the other person agree? You would agree. Would they agree? Would that agreement that they came up with be fair? Would they see a fair agreement as fair? Like, how do you know who's judging fair here? Would you? Would you know if it were fair? Who determines what fair is? Goats and cows need different amounts of grazing. So maybe the fact that he has fewer goats means he needs more land to graze on. How are you going to resolve that exactly? Between the two of you, especially, because there's just a mismatch, right? There's an inherent inequality to goats and cows. They're not the same creatures. That's why they have different names, right? They have different names because they have vastly different behaviors, properties, requirements, all kinds of things, right? They're just not the same. Now, how does the fact that goats and cows need different amounts of grazing impact the fairness? Like, it kind of complicates the fairness. Like if you have 10 cows and I have 20 cows, maybe I need twice as much grass to graze. I don't know, something like that, right? It seems linear and easy. Goats to cows is not actually easy at all right? And then what if somebody else comes into the fold and they have cows or goats or something else entirely? What if they just have a dog or a bunch of dogs that want to poop all over the commons? And that interferes with the grazing, by the way. It's commons, though, so why would you keep them out? It's a common space. See, these are not straightforward problems. They seem straightforward. When you lock somebody into their own personal private perspective, it seems easy to solve because it is easy to solve when it's just you. But it's not easy to solve when you involve one other person. Now, there's an exception for family members. This is where communism works, right? Socialism works in families, right? Somebody makes a decision on how things are distributed, usually the father, and things get distributed. Wealth redistribution works. Like your parents, hopefully, if they're good parents or at least good enough parents, want to distribute their wealth to their children in some fashion. The children are never satisfied with this, different problem, but they do that, right? So wealth redistribution as a thing works at a certain scale of family. It doesn't work outside of that scale, though. That's the problem. The pattern persists, this hierarchical pattern of somebody has to do the determining or the managing. I mentioned that earlier, right? It doesn't work without management. Nothing works without management unless there's only one person involved. And even then, I would argue you have to manage your time, energy, and attention. right, in order to get things done. And that's what creates value, by the way. And when time, energy, attention is directed, that's power. By the way, I have a video on power. You should check my definition out. I think you'll find it better than pretty much everybody else's. And if it's not, let me know. Like, comment. So they're appealing to what you would try, to what your perspective is. You're assuming, right, that other people have that same perspective and that same goal and that same idea of fairness, and that they see the world exactly the same way that you do, and that they'll interpret the world exactly the same way that you do, and they'll interpret the standard of fairness exactly the same way that you do. And you look, personally, you should assume that we're cooperative creatures. We want to cooperate with people. We have a lot in common, including wanting to cooperate. But the thing is, those things don't exist, right? I mean, how long in the commons before you just have too many people using the same limited ground? Who's going to resolve that problem? Because that problem's not in the example that the narrator gave you, but it is a problem in the real world where things happen, right? So not your fantasy world or their fantasy world, right? Where it just turns out, I mean, I don't know what your experience is, but every single problem in my head gets solved really easily. It's fantastic. The number of times that actually works when I implement it is embarrassingly small, but large enough that I ain't complaining. But like, that's a trick. They keep you stuck in your head, in your personal, private perspective, right? But the determination about goats and cows and how many people and whether or not you can let dogs on the common space, that can't be made between people as equals until everybody is happy. Like, it can't be done. It's just technically impossible, mathematically impossible. And that's the problem, right? The narrator didn't tell you that, right? They just gave you a solution to something that looked like a problem to you, and maybe they think it's a problem too. But that is how and why we have government. You can say, well, we need a different form of government all day long, right? But you can't get around government, right? And then it becomes a problem of, well, which form of government do you need? And that's more like, well, which set of problems do you have? And that might depend on all kinds of things. How big's your country? How many people are in the country of the physical size that it is? What are the resources available, right? That's why we end up with different governments around the world. There's nothing wrong with that. Maybe not everybody should even be a democratic republic. I don't know. Certainly seems that way to me, by the way. Generally, the Middle East thinks so. They don't think democratic republic is a good idea because they won't do it. Fair enough. Maybe they should. I don't know. I'm not going to make a claim here. I'm just saying there's lots of possibilities, and maybe those possibilities are more real than you'd like to understand, or maybe you can't understand it. Fair enough. We all have limitations, right? But again, like, you can solve the government problem in your head. Any problem can be solved in your head, and it makes you feel smart. I solve a problem in my head, I feel smart. Like, I got a solution. Did I implement the solution? No, but I have one. It's here. It's right here. It's ready to go, and it's beautiful. It's good. Every solution I've ever come up with in my head is beautiful. They're all beautiful. It's great. You should join me. It's fantastic. I wish you could be in here. Everything's so much better. That's utopianism and idealism, right? Like, it's not a good thing. I have to keep a lid on it myself. We all do, but we all have to work on that, right? That's the ego appeal, though, right? There is a limiting perspective to just you as a single person, right? A very limiting perspective. And that's narrowing the world, right? Or flattening the world, reducing it, compressing it, flattening the world, right? And to where there's only a single perspective, right? And socialism would work. Socialism works in that environment. That's not the world you and I live in, unfortunately. First of all, you and I, right? Again, you don't live in my head where all the perfect solutions exist. I don't know why you don't live there, but you appear to live out there, which is why I'm doing videos, obviously, right? And so it's, the flat world is bad enough, right? But the trick is, obviously you came up with this solution. Other people are like you, so they will come to the same conclusion to do the same thing. But this assumes all kinds of things, as I went over earlier. It assumes that they are going to react to the situation that they find themselves in the same way as you, that they interpret that situation the same way as you, right? And that they saw the thing the same way as you, and they have the same standards of judgment as you do. And all of that is false, and it's almost certainly impossible. Not all of it together. Each individual piece. It's vanishingly small that I see what people see. Like sometimes I'll just be like, oh, did you see that bird? And they're like, no. And I'm like, what do you mean you didn't see the bird? The bird's obviously there. You can hear the bird, right? The bird's chirping away, flew right past us and then went and chirped. Maybe they can't hear the bird. I don't know. These systems don't work because of that. But you've been tricked by being in your personal perspective, right? You're stuck in your personal, private perspective where everything works. And obviously people are like you. They're going to find a way to make it work too, right? But it's all impossible. Now, it's worth asking because I do videos on conspiracy. I'll link one here. I got I think 3. Does the narrator know that they're doing this trick? Do they understand that they're a musician or a wizard, or are they a magician? Are they a wizard? Are they a sorcerer? Not always. Sometimes, right? But not most of the time, right? People are very good at mimicry, at copying, right? At aping, if you will, what other people do. So they might be sort of parroting something that they have heard before that convinced them. Oh, I was convinced by this argument. I know how to make this argument. I'm going to make this argument. Or worse yet, because there's a lot of, propositionally astute and articulate people out there. I'll talk about that enchantment at some point. I'm sure I've mentioned it before, that style of enchantment. They might be enchanted by the idea, right? And they might actually believe it and be able to defend it somewhat. Like they're not just mimicking or parroting somebody else's statements. They actually understand at some level the arguments and are able to enhance those arguments in some way, right? Or steel man them, if you will. This is why I'm not a fan of steel manning. It's a very tricky subject. Maybe I'll do a video on that. If you want a video on that, give me some comments. Maybe I'll do that one. But you'll notice, hopefully, that when people fail to defend things, right, their ideas, they don't notice. They think they have won when they clearly have not won. This happens all the time, right? And it's not about like capitulating and admitting incorrectness. It's about doubling down often. You see this a lot on Twitter. I just had this interaction just before making this video. Oh, I see. You don't care about the truth. And I'm like, I didn't ask about the truth. I don't know if what you're saying is true. I don't care if what you're saying is true. It had nothing to do with my question or my point. Guy didn't understand it. So he attacked me, of course. That's natural human behavior. But people do this all the time. And if you want to know more about that, look, it's a topic for another day, or rather for another video. Like, subscribe, comment if you want to hear that, more on that particular topic, and maybe I'll do a video on it if I can manage it. The problem is, it's a long and lonely journey here on YouTube, right? I have only my perspective on what's going on, which includes some vague Google numbers on how well things are resonating with my audience, and some comments from people on my Mark of Wisdom Discord server and things like that, which are all very helpful and super valuable, and why this channel is even, still around, right? But it's the same problem I've been talking about. Without your communication, right, which is a form of cooperation, right, this channel doesn't work. Like, I don't have an audience, right? I don't have a channel. Or there are some people who are telling me they're getting a lot out of this, particularly in person, which is just lovely and flattering and amazing to hear, right? But I do appreciate the cooperation, which is why that I'm always grateful for your time and attention.